Okay.
Hi, everyone. It is 12 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Joanna Forbes. I'm the HR advisor for the Small Business Development Center at Kent State, Tuscarawas. Steve, our usual moderator, is having some technical difficulties today, so he is on the call. If anybody had any questions for Steve specifically, I will have his contact information at the end, but you will only be hearing me today. So we are going to go ahead and get started. This is our Ask the Expert series. We've had several webinars on marketing and business planning and human resources. And today we're going to be talking about performance management. So for all of our webinars, I just like to point out that this will be in a presentation format. So again, I'll be the only one speaking today. Everybody should be on mute. If you're not on mute, if you can mute yourself. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll get to those at the end to the best that we can. Again, we are having a little bit of a technical difficulty, so if we don't get to your questions, we will collect them and we'll respond back to you personally via email. This will be recorded and put on our website, and everybody today will be receiving the presentation emailed to you as a PDF. So do not feel like you need to write everything down that you are seeing today. And just a disclaimer for today that this webinar is for informational purposes only. And I like to just point that out because a lot of this stuff can change, especially when we're talking about COVID. So please refer to all of your referenced websites that I'm going to point out and your business industry standards for all of your current information. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So for today, we're going to be talking about what is performance management, communication, orientation and onboarding, performance appraisals, goal setting, corrective action, and some final reminders. So as we get started today, I just want everyone to think about what changed in your workplace over the last 6 months. And I'm sure there's been a lot, but when I say what changed, I just kind of want you to think about what changed in terms of your employees and how they work, maybe where they physically work. And what changes do you think are going to stay in place? And what do you think will go back to normal, if we ever get to that point of going back to normal? So just kind of keep that in mind. And not only just for today for the webinar, but that's something as business owners and leaders that we really need to think about as we move through this whole COVID pandemic. So the first things first is I want to talk about why is performance management important? We know it's important, but let's really think about what that actually means. We all want a successful business. We've worked hard, we had a passion product maybe, and we are really moving forward with it, and we want it to be successful. And then once we start hiring employees, we're bringing some employees into that mix, and we need them to be on board as well. So managing our employees effectively means our goals are being met, and that means we are going to have that successful business. So we really have to make that decision and decide that we know that our employees are really contributing to the successful business that we have. And that's why it's so important to have some sort of performance management program at your workplace. So for your staff to be successful, they really need to have this combination. So you're hiring your staff and they come to you at the top with knowledge, skills, ability, and some talent, okay? That's their aptitude. Now, they may not have all of the things check, check, check whenever you're hiring them because there is some, on-the-job learning, but they have those basic things there that you need. And then you're providing the resources, the tools, the equipment that they need, the support, the training, the appropriate time for that training. So those are the things at the bottom that you are giving your employees in order to contribute to that success. So that middle piece there, that's the motivation. What you really can't control. That's their attitude, whether their confidence level, the focus, how driven are they? So in order to have that complete part of success, as business owners, as business leaders, we need to make sure we're providing that bottom part. We're hiring employees that have that top part, and then hopefully we can create that motivation and then that total success. So every HR webinar I do, no matter what the topic is, I always talk about my HR 101 rules. And this is so important in terms of performance management, and that's being consistent in everything that you do and documenting everything. So now, of course, I don't mean you have to document every single thing that your employee does. I had a client last week joke about that and say, should I write down every time they do this or do that? And that's not what I mean. But as we talk through performance management, we will talk specifically about being consistent in our performance management and when to document things. So what is all involved in performance management? Now, if you have one employee, whether you have 250 employees, you're doing these pieces, okay? So you may not have a formal performance review process, but that's just one very small piece of the pie. There's planning that we have to do. There's that ongoing coaching, that daily coaching. And of course, there's setting goals and planning out those goals. So even if you don't have a formal performance review or performance evaluation in place, that's okay. We can talk about that, setting something like that up, but it's all these other pieces as well that are all part of your performance management and helping your employees really perform to the best of their ability, because that's your goal. So this is the employment cycle. I always like to point this up in various different HR webinars. So if anybody on the call today has ever been on any of my other webinars, you've probably seen this before, but this is a great visual to kind of really see everything that's involved when you're hiring employees, needing staff, recruiting them, screening them, hiring them, and training them and managing them. And then, of course, ultimately employment may end, and then you're back there on that cycle again. And performance management is there throughout this entire cycle, from hiring the staff all the way through employment ending. So we're going to talk a little bit about where we see performance management in some of these pieces here. Because of course the goal in employment is really you want to hang out in that managed circle there at the bottom for as long as possible, because it takes a lot of time and a lot of money to recruit and screen and hire and train, as you all know, because you've been there before. So if we don't do those pieces effectively, we're kind of just always on this cycle. So we really want to do all of that effectively so we can hang out in that managed circle for as long as we can. So let's talk about communication first, because this, of course, is the key part in management in general, managing performance, or really any part of your personnel dealings. Is we have to have that effective communication. So just some things to remember, that in communication, it's a two-way process. You need to talk to your employees about what's happening, and they need to be able to communicate with you about their needs or lack of training or anything that they may need assistance with as well. So it has to be a two-way process. Clear and concise for sure. When we're talking about standards, especially in areas of safety, we have got to be clear and concise about the way that we're going to explain different processes. And we'll get a little bit deeper into that in a minute. And using the medium that best suits the message. Whatever you're trying to get across to your employees, it's not always appropriate to put it in an email or just leaving a voicemail about something or hanging up a poster. Sometimes it needs to be face-to-face, or in these days, social distanced with a mask. But so it's all about whatever the message is we need to be mindful that we're using the most appropriate means of communication. And keeping our employees in the loop is needed, and if there wasn't ever a time that was as crucial as that is right now, as everything that we're going through right now. And adapting your communication to your organization for sure. If somebody is working in a software management company, they may communicate a than somebody that maybe is working in a manufacturing environment, because your employees are out on the floor and perhaps they don't even have access to email and those types of things. So you really want to make sure that you are adapting your communication, using the best medium that's appropriate, and being clear and concise, and giving employees a way to be able to communicate back to you. Again, it's a two-way process. It's not always at them. So again, right now we are living it. We are in the middle of it. So organizational change is one of the most crucial times to have that effective communication. There has been so many workplace policies that have happened over the last 6 months. So all of the training, all of the policy changes, temperature checks, masks, where maybe people can eat their lunch, all of these things, schedule changes. There has never been a time in recent history where this has been as crucial as it is right now. So we really need to make sure that our communication game is on. Do not fear over communicating over and over and over again, especially in these times where safety is so critical. So we want to make sure we don't have that ineffective. We don't want disengaged employees. We don't want misunderstandings. Anger, hostility. Right now there has been so many different types of lawsuits that are coming up because of COVID, and just blatant people not understanding all of the things that their employer has put into place to keep them safe. So we're seeing so many of those types of things. And it could have all just been a misunderstanding or ineffective communication. So we want to have that effective communication. We want employee morale, satisfaction, engagement, ways to understand their employment, give them a voice, avoid all of those misunderstandings, because ultimately all of this, it does create a greater efficiency at the workplace and reduces costs. So, and just some things, we learned these things, many moons ago, but these are just some great reminders about our nonverbals whenever we're talking to employees. We keep hearing the term empathy right now. We are in a time of crisis in our workplaces, and empathy is key to talking to our employees, whether we have employees that are have a loved one that has COVID, if they've had it, if they are juggling, trying to manage elderly parents, children at home. Right now is such a crucial time to make sure that we are using those listening skills and we are being empathetic and talking to the needs of our employees for sure. So again, back to our employment cycle. So that was just a little piece on communication. So we're going to go back now. We're going to talk a little bit about orientation and onboarding, because that's the piece when your employees, now you've hired them, you screened them, and now you're really going to start focusing on their performance. So one thing I always like to remind clients about is connecting their employees' job functions to your company mission immediately, right off the bat. If I'm ever helping clients write job descriptions, I always try to remind them, to put that somewhere on there. What is it that the receptionist does that actually contributes to the mission of the organization? The receptionist isn't just answering phones or taking messages. What are they actually doing that's contributing to that mission? Whether somebody is the CEO or the environmental services aide, everybody is contributing. And that's just one piece that lets people know how important their job is to the organization right off the bat. So employees, they're showing up, okay? And typically they're enthusiastic. That's what we want to see. We want to see some enthusiastic employees. So when we have a poorly planned or a non-existent orientation program, usually that just costs us more in the end, because we're trying to make that good first impression as well. And we really want to get that early connection to employees right away, because we want to retain them. Because again, we spent all that time and money hiring and advertising and screening and interviewing and training. So we want to make sure that we don't skimp out on these pieces so we can get our employees to stay. So just a little bit about orientation and onboarding. So orientation, that's just that initial exposure to the company. And it's usually, within the first couple weeks, the first couple days. This is usually a formal, they're watching their safety videos, they're meeting people. It's how you share your policies and your procedures, and it's getting them up and running. But when we talk about onboarding, this is really something that can go on sometimes for as long as 18 to 24 months. And that's that entire training and engagement process. Professional development for some organizations, if somebody's coming in through a succession plan, and really getting people fully into the organization. Again, sometimes we are so, desperate sometimes to hire people and to get them into positions that once we do, we're so busy ourselves with our own functions that we sometimes kind of forget. We can't blame, our high turnover on the people all the time. We hire people, then they leave. We hear that all the time. We really need to look and step back and say, what are we doing for these folks when they come on board to really keep them engaged and make them want to stay? We really have to take a look at that. So you really wanted to see, how do we make that person feel welcome? Do they have clear direction about their job? What types of things are you giving them on their first day? And again, just a reminder that how are you making them aware of the company's mission and their part in it? There's been time and time again, they have done surveys and studies, and the more people are engaged with their organization's mission, the longer they stay. So just some things to finish up on orientation. Do have a well thought out plan, introduce people, important housekeeping items, set some immediate goals and expectations so they kind of know the direction they should be headed and make them feel welcome. Don't confuse orientation with onboarding. And what I mean by that is after somebody's, first 2 days of watching, safety videos and they're, don't just walk away and wipe your hands of them, stay connected to them. And don't just dump all the information, try to spread it out. And remember to ask for feedback. How did that work? What could we have done differently? Are you getting what you need from us during your orientation time? Because again, it's not always just the person's fault of why they didn't make it. And then let's not forget about our folks that are out there virtual onboarding, and this may not apply to anybody on the call today, but just a reminder not to forget about our employees that are out there working from home or working remotely. We want to make sure that they're, just as much getting their onboarding in as well. So the other piece to performance management is training. And we just have to be mindful of the fact, and we've all heard this before, especially in adult learning, one size all approach may not work. So we really need to look at our training and see what's working and what's not working. Again, feedback is so important when it comes to training. And training and coaching kind of go hand in hand. Coaching is so important. This may be the most important piece, I think, of performance management, because this is that day-to-day touching base with your employees, really seeing what's going on. Now, some levels of management, we don't have as much opportunity perhaps as maybe those of us that are supervisors that we would say are out on the floor or talking to employees more, and they may be doing this coaching. So again, that's why it's critical if you have different layers of management at your organization to make sure that the layer that is so close to the employees is doing this on a daily basis, for sure. It's expected. We should be out there coaching our employees. And we shouldn't be confusing. Coaching isn't career counseling or it could be some of that, but it's not just career counseling or just mentoring or just doing performance review. It is so important to really do that day-to-day, hands-on of checking with our employees, helping them, assisting them, recognizing opportunities to improve their performance, for sure. That is the most important. We hear, management by walking around and those types of terms that we've heard before. And coaching is part of that. That is for sure that walking around, checking in with employees, and not always the negative stuff too, right? Sometimes, our employees that are successful and they do fine and they come in and they leave, sometimes we tend to forget about them. So again, it's so important to touch base with those employees that are doing well too, not just always pointing out where we need some improvements. So what coaching is not in performance management, again, it's not just giving performance evaluations, and it's definitely not just doing the disciplinary matters. So it is, again, it's that day to day, the positive stuff, and then maybe the room for improvement stuff. And this is the most important thing. That employees know that they're being heard and that they have a chance to talk to you about something. And then you can catch things that are happening out there that maybe you weren't even aware of before time is marching on, and we're not aware of it. So it is so important to make sure that we keep up with our coaching when it comes to performance management. So ask employees questions, get some discussion going, make sure they understand whenever we're going over a new process or a new piece of equipment. Make sure that, reach an agreement that progress is being made. And that can be a simple conversation. Do you understand? Yes, I do. Demonstrating that they understand. This isn't formal. Coaching isn't typically a formal process. Giving them praise, look for good points to reinforce if there's any next steps that they need to do. And making it clear that you're looking forward to their next stage of learning. Again, this is all part of employee engagement, which is part of performance management. So sometimes we think performance management, again, performance reviews are just the bad stuff, but it's really not. We really want to keep our employees engaged. That's part of our job as the supervisor. Again, not just that, not just the bad stuff all the time. So, and which leads me to how we discuss performance problems, because again, we do have the bad stuff sometimes. Oh, sorry, my slide went. So discussing performance problems. So the first thing we want to do is, and now I have 6 steps up here, and I always tell managers, I don't expect anybody to memorize anything or to have this list on their bulletin board. But when it comes to performance management and when we start documenting performance problems, you always want to have your ducks in a row. So what very, very first step is comparing the performance against your standards. And why that is so important is because that keeps you on check. That keeps you consistent. So you're not, comparing Sally's performance to Susie's performance to Bob's performance. You have standards and everybody's compared to the same thing. And then you're looking at the gaps. Why is there gaps between the performance and what our standards are? We need to determine the reason for the gap. Lack of training, lack of an orientation. The standards are out of date. The standards aren't documented properly. They're maybe 2 floors above where the person is, or the person that trained is no longer there, so they didn't have anybody to go back to. There could be many, many reasons why there's a gap, or just the fact that the person lacks the skill of what they need. So then we have to correct that negative or that incorrect performance. And then that's when we monitor employee behavior. And then if it's not corrected, we move on to further disciplinary or corrective action, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But again, I just want to reiterate the importance of standards and having documented standards, because if you're sitting somewhere, I always sound like I'm doom and gloom in HR, but the reality is that if you are in any sort of workplace claim where somebody said they weren't treated fairly, this is the type of stuff that has your documentation. Standards, gaps, the reason for the gap, fixing them, and then monitoring them. And of course, all of that is documented. And of course, all of these conversations, when we're talking about performance problems and formal, talking about performance, just a quick, hey, do it this way, private, balanced, give them some good stuff too, make it specific and document it, and it's personal to the person. For sure. Private and confidential, definitely key. Okay, so let's talk about those pesky performance evaluations. Nobody likes to do them, and nobody likes to get them. So why do we have them, right? I've heard that a lot in my years in HR. But I think we do know why we have to have them if we're going to be honest with ourselves. But it does give us a good time a good formal time that's blocked on our calendar to actually sit down with an employee and go over the year in review. And maybe maybe that's the time where you can have some conversations that you just really don't have time for, out on the floor doing that coaching. So they are necessary. A lot of times they're also tied to maybe the wage increases. So we might use them for that purpose as well. So, and again, aligning the goals of the organization to the goals of the employees. So there's several reasons why we have to do these pesky performance evaluations. The other thing I like to point out is this doesn't have to be a big, huge, cumbersome undertaking. If you at least have a simple form for a performance appraisal, again, that's better than nothing. I hate for people to get overwhelmed with the process when really it should just be about the actual action and not the process. So just performance appraisal versus performance management. For a performance appraisal, it's that one-time event, typically annual. It's an actual meeting. It's retrospective. You're looking at the past year to see how it went, and there's typically some sort of form involved. Whereas performance management, which we've been talking about, that coaching and standards, that's ongoing. That might just be on the fly. It's typically could be prospective. Well, tomorrow we're going to do, and it's about making progress and growing. Whereas a performance appraisal, we're usually talking about the year in review. So one thing I always want to caution everybody about, our performance review meetings are not a time for bad surprises. So we really shouldn't be sitting employees down and telling them, oh, by the way, for the past 8 months, you've been doing this wrong, or you're one step away from termination. There shouldn't be anything in there that the employee is really hearing for the first time, that they should really be caught off guard about. If you've been doing your ongoing coaching and checking in with the employees as we do, when we're sitting down for our performance review, it should be more general about the performance, maybe a couple things here and there they didn't know about, and then really talking about the goals, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. So when we're going to plan for those appraisals, this is really an opportunity to review the performance, talk about some lessons learned. Think about that training that I sent you to, or we went to, or did you learn anything from that, or what do you think we could do to make that better? Look at some progress. Is there any position that you're interested in, anything you'd like to cross train on, and then get those goals and objectives for the next period. So just have those things ready whenever you're going to sit down with your employee for a performance evaluation. So just some quick tips, be prepared to discuss things that maybe you weren't planning on, because again, this is their time to come with you with some things. This isn't the time to be defensive. Sometimes employees, they're afraid to talk up throughout the year, so they may save their laundry list of complaints for the performance review. It happens. And sometimes it could be justified. There could be some things, some failures along the way, or some lack of resources that maybe you weren't aware of. So don't be defensive, accept it and see what we can do to work through it and move on to the next area of the review. And then, of course, being respectful of your employees' time. So again, you planned for this, you had it on your calendar, you have 30 minutes set aside. So this isn't something that we're doing standing by a loud machine or in the break room when people are coming out, getting into the refrigerator. So this really needs to be a private, no cell phone, no interruption meeting. So let's talk about goal settings for a minute, because again, we know how important goals are for your employees. It keeps them engaged, but also they really should be contributing, again, to the ultimate goal of the organization. I'm sure everybody's seen this before, SMART goal criteria. I do like to just to remind people of this, though, because even though we may know what all the letters stand for and we know that it's important, sometimes we don't really see it all the way through when we're thinking about goals. And again, from an HR standpoint, from a management standpoint, it is so important to make sure that everything we do with employees again, with the documented and the being consistent and having SMART goals are so important to measure your employees' success, or they're not able to succeed. So that as well. So that's why it's so important to make sure we use SMART goals. So just for example, if we say something like, well, I expect you to cross-train with another position, you're sitting in your performance review and that's what you say. What does that actually mean? So if somebody comes back, they're sitting down and you say, okay, last year we said we need to cross-train with another position. Well, I did that. I spent a couple hours with Bob, looking at how he does inventory. So is that what you meant? Is that a check? Does that mean that person passed the goal, or is that not really what you meant? Did you mean that you wanted them to cross-train with the bartender position for at least 20 hours by May 1st, 2021? Okay, so it's specific. I didn't want you just to cross-train with Bob on inventory. I wanted you to cross-train with a bartender for at least 20 hours. Okay, that's measurable. Okay, is it achievable? 20 hours in 6 months? Yes, that's achievable. I expect, it's reasonable. Is it relevant? Yes, it's relevant. We need somebody else to be able to step in for the bartender every once in a while. And it's time-centered by May 1st, 2021. So if you have goals like this, it is so much easier to justify if you're making any sort of employment decisions on somebody, whether or not they're actually in their goals, as opposed to, just, willy-nilly them saying they did it and you saying, well, that's not what I had in mind. But when you have it specific like this, it's so much more easy to justify and to measure, really, to see how well they're doing. So, because you want to know, are they making progress? Again, you're checking progress throughout the year on those goals, again, with your ongoing coaching. That's all part of your performance management. If you have those measurable objectives, again, there's your tangible evidence of completion of objectives. And I hate to always think in terms of there's your proof, but there's your proof. If you ever need to justify employment decisions, here it is right here. These are the goals we've laid out. We've tried several times and they're unsuccessful. So, and again, you need to commit to by making sure there's resources. If the goal is to have somebody cross-train with the bartender, then that bartender needs to be on board too, because if they keep, shoo-shooing the person away or they're not on board, then you have some other problems there that you need to deal with. Okay, so let's talk about the ugly, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So corrective action or progressive discipline, these terms are used interchangeably. This is definitely another piece of your performance management program. And by program, I don't mean a formal program. I just mean, your performance management philosophy and the things that you are doing for your employees. So this is a necessary step that usually you don't want to have to deal with, but we've all been there from time to time. So this is typically going to be happening again down in your manage bubble, and it could lead to that employment ends piece of the employment cycle. So just some basic principles. Very first thing is, are you using the right tool? Did you already coach this person? Have you already talked to them? Did they have the appropriate training? Before we start handing out disciplinary actions, is it appropriate? Be precise regarding your reasons for the corrective action and your future expectations. Okay, that's definitely a principle of disciplinary action. Disciplinary action meetings can get heated, for sure. No one likes to, quote, get in trouble. So we want to make sure we're maintaining that professional manner. We want to keep it confidential. It's between you and the employee. If your organization is larger and you have an HR person, they should be involved as well. And we want to focus on the matter at hand. A lot of times when an employee is sitting in a disciplinary action meeting, they'll start bringing in all kinds of different pieces to the puzzle. But you want to keep it focused on the matter at hand and keep our emotions in check. So the actual definition of progressive discipline is a series of corrective actions that assist an employee in improving their performance by bringing it up to standards, because we are literally trying to correct the actions of our employees. We aren't looking to fire people. We don't hire people just so we can get them out the door as fast as we can. We want our employees to succeed, and we want to correct their actions and bring them up to our standards. So that is really what the whole purpose of progressive discipline is. It's not to run people through the gamut of the process. We're trying to reduce terminations, really. We're hoping if we can start this process that we can correct it and then we can move on. But really, there are other purposes of it. It gives those employees that specific evidence of their unacceptable behavior. And there's your documentation. If you're sitting somewhere, if the person files for unemployment or there's a wrongful discharge claim, these are all of the things that you're going to show that you did. Here are my standards. Here's what we did to try to improve the employee, and it just didn't work. Here's some common steps. If you don't have a corrective action policy, these are the very common steps that we typically see. And again, these are all things that we can help you with at the SBDC, writing policies for your employee handbook, helping you to write your policies, reviewing the policies that you have, any of those types of things. So here are the common steps. We have oral, verbal warning, written warning, a suspension or a probation, and then a termination. This is typically step process that most companies have. The other thing that we can talk about in our corrective action policy are performance improvement plans, or what we sometimes call PIPs. It's very specific. It gives clear-cut objectives and expectations of what you expect that employee to do to bring their work up to standards. You have time frames, expected actions and results, and then of course the consequence if they cannot perform these actions, which is usually further corrective action, including termination. So this is the same thing as kind of part of the corrective action. It's usually in conjunction with, and it just gives a little bit more detailed of what you expect of that employee. Okay, but it's not always going to work, right? When is it time to throw in the towel? We can't hang on forever if they're just not cutting the mustard. So typically it is when coaching is not improving performance. You've tried coaching, you've tried the corrective action, it's just not working. The employee worked through the corrective action and now they're at that termination level. It just, again, the work is improving. You had a formal performance improvement plan on that employee and they just did not satisfy the requirements in them. Or, and here's a big one, if you've ever terminated anybody else for the same reason, then you better stay consistent and terminate somebody else for it, or you're going to have that inconsistent terminations, and that is definitely something that you don't want to do. And typically, what are some examples of terminable acts? And what I mean by is the employee might not have any verbal or written warnings in their file, but then they're fighting, destructive behavior, blatant insubordination, theft, harassment, illegal drug use, inappropriate conduct, conduct harmful to a company's image on or off the job. These are all typical examples of terminable acts where you could typically terminate an employee without going through the corrective action process. So just to finish up today, having our ducks in a row, make sure your performance standards are objective and applied evenly to all of your employees. Document all of your corrective action, all of your major performance conversations. I have the word major in there because you don't need to write down every single time you walk through and maybe talk to somebody about something. But if you're starting to see a pattern with an employee, or if you've had the conversation several times, it's starting to hit you, oh, I've had this conversation already several times, it's probably now time to start documenting and think about corrective action. And of course, being consistent in all of your management functions. So developing, keep that ongoing performance communication. Performance management is a continuing process from the day they walk in the door until the day they walk out the door. So just keep it going, keep that communication going. Keep dates are important. If you're not using performance evaluations annually, try to have some sort of time where you can sit down and talk to employees and look at your goals and objectives. Just because you set one on September 1st, 2020 does not mean that it's going to be relevant September 1st, 2021. So goals and objectives can be changed. That's perfectly fine. And this past year is a great example where I'm sure a lot of people's performance evaluation goals went out the window. So that is perfectly fine. Again, communication on it. So some final reminders today, maintain those open communication channels so you can work through these performance issues and so they don't just get worse and worse and hang over everybody. Keep coaching, keep redirecting and assisting our employees who need assistance and those who can't meet our standards. Just meet with those employees, recognize when you maybe need to start working through corrective action or a more formal process. And let's try to think beyond COVID. Let's hope one day we can look beyond COVID, and just think about workplace standards. What is still going to be a standard, even during this time? It's not like right now we throw all of our standards out the windows and we just willy-nilly do to get by. We should still have some workplace standards. We still should be trying to keep our employees engaged. We want our employees to be confident in our business, that we're ensuring that safe workplace. So all of these things, shouldn't, go away when COVID goes away. We want to keep all of these things in place and just keep thinking about, what challenges may lie ahead, as we move through this time. These are just some common resources that I would recommend if you're interested in performance management. I didn't mention earlier, but I want to mention it now because I have DOL on the screen. Performance management policies aren't something that are regulated by the Department of Labor or the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They don't say you have to have a corrective action policy. And if you do, it should have these 4 steps. When the Department of Labor or the EEOC is looking to see if they're coming in for a workplace investigation, for example, they're not looking to see that you have the right policy. They're looking to see if you have a policy and if you're following it consistently. So I just want to point that out. Those types of things are however, they will step in if they think you're using the policies that you have inconsistently or unfairly with your employees, or the policies are written unfairly. So those are the types of things that they'll be looking at. So at this point, I don't think Steve can talk. So I'm just here's his information. If you need any further information, again, all of the things that I talked about over the last 42 minutes I think we've been on are all things that we can assist you with at the SBDC, policies, performance management, any sort of employee relations issues. Please reach out to Steve. It's confidential at no cost to our SBDC clients. And I will look to see if we have any questions from Deanna, if her audio is working.
Joanna?
Oh, Steve, you're there.
Yeah. I still hear the background. There was a question. If we're letting some COVID, how do we begin writing up things?
I think I heard you say if we're letting things slide because of COVID, how can we start like correcting the action again, like once COVID's over? Was that the question?
Yes.
Okay. So, and that's a good question because it seems like we're kind of right now in this state of like just willing things slide a little bit. And that is a fair question. And what I will say to that is we don't know when the end is in sight for sure. I think we all know that. But if you are letting different standards maybe be different than what they were pre-COVID. It's all about the consistency. So if you have a standard that's maybe different, any sort of standard, as long as you are managing that the same for all of your employees, you're fine. If the time comes when you can say, look, we need to go back up to, and I'm going to make this up, 40 widgets an hour as opposed to 20 widgets an hour, as long as that's communicated and that the employees understand. And of course, document that that change is going back. That's what I would say to that. Do we have any other questions?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, Deanna, I'm all done. If anybody has any questions, they can always send me an email, or they can reach me through Steve's contact information, and he'll get it to me for sure.
Thank you, Joanna.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.